The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold. And the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody want clout.
Welcome to the Week 4 edition of the Rearview Mirror podcast, where we're going to break down all the games from Week 3, look at who won, who lost, why they won, why they lost, look deeper than the score, look deeper than just the box score, look at some of the advanced metrics and analytics that went into the performances of these teams in their games, and try to understand things so that we can learn more about these teams and find some tidbits that we can apply to future weeks of betting in the NFL. We also look at injuries, other advanced metrics and stats and charts. But first, let's jump right into the headlines. Story number 1, Year of the Dog update. This was a good week for favorites. We have favorites going 10-6. Depending on where you put the Giants, they obviously closed as a favorite. They're an underdog for pretty much the entire week, however. So if you throw that game out, favorites went 10-5 if you're going to call the Giants a favorite at the end there. Against the spread, basically a 500 week for the underdogs. There were a number of dogs that looked terrible this week, and the favorites blew them out. A couple of the games, Falcons crushed the Bucks. We saw that on Thursday night. We saw the Bengals crush the Titans. We saw the Colts crush the Jaguars. But there were a number of dogs that really hung in there and were covering for some or most or all of the game until the last moments. A number of those teams, first up, Minnesota in New Orleans. They were covering the game pretty much from the second quarter all the way through late in the fourth quarter. They lost their starting quarterback, had to put a rookie in there in the Dome down in New Orleans. Obviously a very tough environment to be thrown in there. But the Vikings were playing pretty well in that game. They lost by 11 points. The Saints scored a late touchdown, and they were a 10.5-point underdog, so they narrowly missed out on the cover there by half a point. If you look at the Rams and the Cowboys, the Rams were crushing the Cowboys throughout most of that game. Cowboys came back late in the game, were able to take a pick six and also a few other big plays to outscore the Rams late in the game and get a win there. So that was heartbreaking for any Rams backers. The Cleveland Browns versus the Baltimore Ravens, that was another very interesting game. Obviously, the Ravens had a 10-7 lead at halftime, but the Browns were up late, and it took the Ravens to take 2 field goals to win the game in the fourth quarter and hold the Browns scoreless in that one. So that was another difficult loss for the underdog backers. And, of course, we have the biggest game of the weekend was the Denver Broncos at Seattle Seahawks. Seattle was winning that entire game, and Denver guys got pretty happy and excited and lucky, obviously, to an extent with Peyton Manning driving that team back to send the game into overtime. Obviously, they went for 2. If they didn't get the 2-point conversion there at the end of the game, that would have been a cover for the dog backers. They got the 2-point conversion, sent it into overtime. Given the new rules that we have last couple of years, the Seahawks had to score a touchdown because they got the ball first. Any other situation, obviously, they're probably going for a field goal there. So the dogs backers would have won as well. But in this case, the Seahawks, first possession, drove the length of the field, scored a touchdown, won by 6 as basically a 4-point favorite there in that game. So tough week for the dogs, good week for the favorites. We'll have to see what Week 4 bodes for the underdog players. Story number 2, injuries. We saw a number of players go out with season-ending injuries. Obviously, the strangest, I guess, to an extent would be Dennis Pitta dislocating his hip. He obviously missed most of the season, all of the season last year with a hip injury. That's got to be difficult for the Ravens and for him personally. You saw Stephen Tulloch, a linebacker for the Lions. I think he tore his ACL while celebrating. That obviously is a difficult injury. You have a number of other guys who are out with season-ending injuries. So it's a very strange year for injuries. Now, everybody says, oh, well, we're having a lot of injured players. They keep saying that every single year. And the reality is most NFL players throughout history have been injured, get injured, deal with aches and pains. There's a study done that 9 out of every 10 former players from this study suffered at least one major injury, dealt with daily pains and aches, throughout the rest of their lifetime. But 91% of these guys are still happy that they played in the NFL. But you look at today and you look at these injuries that we're having in the NFL, I'm not sure if it's these guys are so muffled up and so different, and the tendons and the ligaments and all those things are not as strong as perhaps their muscles and everything they're telling their body to do. Those things are just failing them. I'm not sure guys who are a lot smarter and spend more time in medicine would be able to figure that out. But what I can tell you is this past weekend we had 74 different running backs who carried the ball. 74. 9, and that doesn't include a wide receiver carrying the ball. These are just pure running backs. 9 teams had to start a backup running back due to injury or suspension. Those 9 teams lost 5 of the 9 games. If you look at the injury report headed into this week, there were already 167 players on injured reserve, with the number of people that were on physically unable to perform list, non-football injury list, suspended list. There are a total of 218 NFL players who were not able to suit up for the game this weekend. There were an additional 50 decent players or somewhat quality players who were on the inactive list for games this week. That was a total of 268 players that were missing from the game field this weekend. That's the equivalent of 5 full rosters of players, and we still have 14 weeks in the NFL season to go. So we are dealing with a lot of injuries, and I'm sure guys who like fantasy understand that. I've seen those injuries happen to their teams, but obviously they're important to focus on, and we're going to be touching on those injuries. So I have a whole section dedicated to injuries later in this podcast. Story number 3, avoiding the 0-3 start. There were a number of teams that entered this week who were 0-2, and the question would be, would any of these guys drop to 0-3, which is a hole very difficult to dig themselves out of. We saw 2 teams get it done at home. The Giants upset, well, to an extent. I mean, they were favored at the end, but for most of the week it was definitely an upset over the Houston Texans. The Saints over the Vikings got that done at home as well. If you look at the game on the road, you take the Indianapolis Colts, they went in and throttled the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Chiefs went into Miami and throttled the Dolphins. So both of those teams got it done. There are only 3 0-3 teams left in the league: the Raiders, the Bucks, and the Jaguars. Clearly, I think those teams are probably at the bottom of everyone's power rankings. These teams are not very good. They didn't have high win totals to begin with, so they probably weren't expected to do a lot. But I know that there were a number of guys betting the overs on some of these teams' win totals, thinking that this could be the year for the Jags, this could be the year for the Raiders, and obviously the Bucks had a higher win total, a lot more hope there with Lovie Smith coming to town. They did not get it done. So with that said, let's move things along here and start looking at some of these charts and stats. As you know, one of my favorite statistics is one that I invented myself. It's called Early Down Success Rate. It measures an offense's efficiency. This is a section that we're going to talk about some of these stats on a weekly basis. We're going to throw up some charts and things of that nature, but we're going to keep it pretty basic here at the start of the season. Just going to talk about top 5, bottom 5 from an offensive and a defensive perspective. With that said, let's get on to the offenses that are the top 5 in the NFL from an Early Down Success Rate perspective. Right now we've got the Falcons as far and away number 1, Saints, Cowboys, Colts, and Redskins round out the top 5. Now, the one thing that I'm going to note in this that I do not factor in at this early stage in the season, but in the coming weeks, I'm tracking it right now, but in the coming weeks, it's going to start matriculating into the rankings a little bit more and more each week, and that's strength of schedule. Obviously, some of these teams, if they're playing very weak opposition, that's going to factor against them. Other teams that are playing very strong competition, it's going to factor in their favor. So, that's one of the things that's going to factor in. So right now I just have the top 5 in terms of pure early down success rate. And then I also have a couple of teams that are rising based upon some of the competition that they faced and what direction these offenses may be heading. So a couple of the offenses that are rising from an early down success rate, the Eagles currently not in the pure top 5 for offenses, but they are up there when you factor in strength of schedule. And actually, ironically and interestingly, same for the Rams. When you look at what they've done offensively with Austin Davis the last couple of weeks against the Bucks and the Cowboys, this team has been pushing the ball down the field. They have been avoiding third downs more. So they've actually been a pretty good offense, at least an efficient one for the last couple of weeks. And so year to date, they're a team that potentially could be on the rise. When you look at the bottom 5 offenses, there's going to be a couple teams here that will surprise you, and that's the Patriots and the Lions. Although the Lions have a good record, they're 2-1, including a big victory over the Giants week 1. That was their best early down success rate performance offensively. After that, they really struggled in Carolina, and against the Packers, that was a game where both of those offenses really did not play very well. So they've had 2 straight weeks now where they've struggled. The Patriots are a team that, as I've told my clients for a couple of weeks now, this is not the Patriots of 2007, 2006, 2008, 2009. This is the Patriots of now in 2012, which actually 2013, and right now, which is a team that's a lot more plays closer to line of scrimmage, has to go to third down a lot more often, has to convert on third down, and I don't know if I'd say conservative is the word, but they're less aggressive downfield. That's for sure. And then, of course, you got the Bills and the Jaguars, teams that really are struggling, whether it's quarterback performance, whether it's the run game, those types of things. But from a pure offensive perspective, those teams are struggling. And when you look at the teams that, when you factor in some of their strength of schedule, they aren't right in the top 5 at the bottom 5 at this moment, but they are based upon strength of schedule, and that would be the Dolphins and the Bucs. The Dolphins' quarterback play has been horrendous to the point that Joe Philbin's not even naming Ryan Tannehill as the starter for this upcoming weekend. It's just really bad down in Miami. I think they've got issues defensively as well with players calling out their defensive coordinator, but that team needs to come together quickly, and their quarterback, most importantly, needs to start playing better. And then when you got the Bucs, I think everybody can tell that this offense is not in sync whatsoever, as they were projected to be, getting a big-name quarterback at free agency, drafting a big, tall wide receiver, adding pieces to the offensive line, bringing in a new head coaching coordinator. I know that the coordinator's been ill, and so he's not with the team right now. That's unfortunate, but this team is just not playing well offensively, and when you factor in the strength of schedule, they will be in the bottom 5 quite soon, I'm pretty confident. When you flip over to defensively, let's look at the top 5 defenses. The Dolphins are a top 5 early on success rate defense. The Jets, no surprise there. A couple teams who had horrid defenses to close the year last year, but are currently in the top 5 based on a pure early on success rate metric are the Redskins and the Bears. I mean, we'll talk about the Raiders in a second, but when you look at the Redskins and the Bears, I don't think these teams are going to be here to stay for very much longer. The Bears have been getting by, and I'll talk about them in the review of their game versus the Jets. This team has been getting by on the skin of their teeth the last couple of weeks in games really that they did not. Early down success rate wise, they played okay, but metric wise, they did bad overall. And so, from a defensive perspective, these teams are going to start falling off, partially due to injuries and partially just due to the fact that they are going to be playing some better offenses. Those teams won't be there. The Raiders have been playing up and down. I mean, they did not look good against the Houston Texans, but one of the keys with that game is that the Raiders were very good, held the Texans back in early down success rate offense. The Texans were just converting third downs and moving the ball to the field and controlling time of possession. But from an early down success rate perspective, the Raiders were forcing them into a lot of third down attempts. They just weren't getting off the field. When you look at a couple teams that are on the rise, kind of strange to see these two teams here who got great offenses, but their defenses have struggled. That's the Saints and the Packers. I know the game against the Vikings definitely helped the Saints stock this past week. I know the Lions game for the Packers, they did pretty good against the Lions on first and second down. So that team is on the rise a little bit, but I really don't foresee either of those teams jumping all the way up to the top 5 when you start factoring additional games that they play. I think that you're not going to be able to play the Vikings offense without a quarterback and without Adrian Peterson every single week. So the Saints will probably drop back to the middle of the pack, but as of right now, they're a team that's headed upward. We'll see what happens once they start playing opponents that are a little bit better offensively. Bottom 5 defenses, this is a surprising list here. Maybe not to myself because some of these teams, at least 3 of them, I was down on big time. I think probably a lot of the public, though, was only down on the Steelers and really viewed at least last season, viewed the Browns as having a really good defense and the Rams as having a really good defense. I was not in that camp. I've been critical of people who were supporting the Browns defense, saying it was so great last season. There were a number of people from all walks of life, both in the public realm as TV, media personalities, as well as other guys capping games talking about how good this Browns defense is. It's not that good. It's really not that good when you look at some of the real efficiency metrics that truly matter. The Rams defense, again, they are not playing very well, a bit overrated by people who seem to think that they are a really good defense. They're actually not that good of a defense, and I believe this season they only have 1 sack on the year. I'm not 100% positive on that, but I think that's the case. Then you look at the 49ers, certainly struggling this year with all the injuries and losses, and the Texans, their defense just is not playing well on first, second down. They're playing very good on third down, but not on first and second down. When you look at teams that aren't in the bottom 5 that are headed that direction, the Colts and the Bucs, when you factor in some of the strength of schedule, those teams would be in the bottom 5. And so once they start playing more difficult opponents, and we factor strength of schedule in a little bit more, I think those teams will be fighting over the Steelers and some of these other teams for the bottom 5 ranking. But we'll go ahead and break these things down every single week, give you some of these charts. But that said, let's jump right in here to these games, because I'm actually going to, this is the last week that we have 16 games being played in the card until, I think November or December. So we're going to go ahead and break down every single one of them. That's why this podcast is a little bit lengthier, but hopefully you get some good tidbits information out of it that you can use for the coming weeks. Let's touch briefly on this Falcons-Bucs game from last Thursday. It obviously was one of the most lopsided games that we've seen in recent memory. Obviously, the stats bear that out as well. The Bucs were dead last in first downs converted, dead last in early down success rate offense, dead last in yards per play. And I didn't recall this during the game, but apparently the teams combined to have 9 turnovers. The Bucs had 5. The Falcons had 4. But what we did see offensively from the Falcons was yet another dominant performance out of their passing offense. Even with their maligned offensive line, some injuries there. Matt Ryan, 139 passer rating, 12.3 yards per attempt, and 86% completion rate. He was 24 of 28. That's pretty ridiculous. 8 touchdowns scored on the day. Surprisingly, they only got into the red zone 4 times. They went 3 of 4 in the red zone. They had a lot of big touchdowns, and there was a total of 3 non-offensive touchdowns scored in this game, 2 by the Falcons, 1 by the Bucs. So obviously the Bucs have a lot to work on here after this humiliating performance, and it's going to be interesting to see how the Falcons rebound on the road this week, because they certainly did struggle the last time that they went on the road, and they're once again faced with that test this week. So that'll be interesting to see what they do in Minnesota versus a slightly weaker opponent than the last time where they went up to Cincinnati. Speaking of the Bengals, let's go to a team in their division. The Ravens were playing the Browns. And this was an interesting game because the Ravens came into this game with a very strong defense, and yet they allowed the Browns and their quarterback to pass for 11.4 yards per attempt, have a 126 passer rating, which was 5th best in the league. If a 126 is 5th best, you know that some quarterbacks had some great weeks. 76% completions. They were a very efficient passing offense for the Browns. They were very efficient when they got into the Ravens' red zone, 3 of 4. And then yards per play. They didn't run for very many yards per play, but they overall, because of the passing, they averaged 6.8 yards per play, which was the 4th best in the league. Now, if you look at the Ravens offense was so-so. They were actually better on the ground than they were in the air. They ran for 4.8 yards per carry, even though their running backs were backups. They were chopping through this Cleveland Browns run defense. But they were unable to convert once again when they got into the red zone. They only went 2 of 5 in the red zone. That was 24th in the league. So this team has some things to work on, because they obviously last week they had problems in the red zone as well. Did the Ravens. So it's certainly right now a weakness for them. A big injury that we'll talk about to their tight end that we'll discuss more in the injury section. When you look at the Browns in this game, it's looked like a toss-up type game, which that's what it played out on the field. When you're looking at the stats, it's pretty back and forth. I mean, very similar in some respects. But the Browns were better in the air and the Ravens were better on the ground. You might think that should be reversed, but that's the way that it ended up being in this game. And the Ravens walked away with a last-second victory. Jumping down to another division battle, there were several of these solid division battles this weekend, very competitive, closely matched games, and this was the Eagles versus the Redskins. The Redskins really played tremendous offensively. When you look at what Kirk Cousins brought to that team, obviously I was forecasting that the Redskins were going to be able to cover this game. I also liked it to go over, and we were right on both those accounts. The Redskins earned the most first downs of any team this week. They went 3 of 4 in the red zone. In terms of passer rating and that sort of thing, Kirk Cousins, 103 passer rating, which would have been higher but for the interception that he threw, 8.9 yards per attempt. That was the 6th best in the league. He was 30 of 48, so the Redskins threw 48 passes, and it definitely is something to bear in mind when you're talking about Jay Gruden. This offense and what Jay Gruden does, he likes to pass the ball a lot. So now that he actually has a quarterback in there who he feels comfortable enough to do the job, obviously the first start against a good Eagles team, granted a great offense, a poor defense, but a good overall Eagles team, well-coached Eagles team on the road in Philadelphia. For Cousins to play the way that he did, yes, he did throw that interception, probably cost the game for the Redskins in the long run, but that was a very good performance overall from him, especially when you consider that he got no support on the ground. The Redskins tried 28 times to run the ball, gained a total of 84 yards. That's 3 yards per attempt. The interesting thing here is the Eagles were even worse on the ground. They had 25 attempts, only gained 54 yards. That's 2.2 yards per attempt, 31st in the league. So it was up to the quarterbacks to produce, and they definitely did produce through the air. The Redskins, however, especially in the first half, they controlled the time of possession. The 4th largest differential this entire week, basically 35 minutes to 25 minutes in favor of the Redskins. So a very strong performance, and a game that they were leading throughout the early stages, were tied entering the 4th quarter, and ended up losing by 3. And let's jump now to another divisional battle. This one, from a lower scoring perspective, we went from a very high scoring Eagles-Redskins game to a very low scoring Packers-Lions game, which I think surprised a lot of people. My algorithm actually leaned towards the under. I didn't end up releasing it, but so this score didn't surprise me. The Packers offensively, I'm going to have to rewatch this game a lot closer because there's some numbers here that just don't make a whole lot of sense to me, given some of the deficiencies that I saw in the Lions secondary entering this weekend, because the Packers offense, Aaron Rodgers completed just 16 passes, only 147 passing yards, 5.4 yards per attempt. That was 26th in the league, 59% completion. That was 26th in the league. The Packers only gained 14 first downs. That was 29th in the league. They ran a total yards per play from passing and rushing of 4.3 yards per play. That was 28th in the league. Now, surprisingly, their defense stepped up a little bit to keep the Lions offense in check, particularly from a passer rating standpoint. They held Matt Stafford to just a 61 passer rating. That was 30th in the league. They did that by grabbing 2 interceptions, and ironically, the Lions lost the turnover battle. They had 3 turnovers and only got 1 takeaway from the Packers, yet they had a non-offensive return touchdown, and they ended up winning this game by 12 points pretty handily late. And the other thing, obviously, that I'm going to look at is the Lions actually had the most dominant time of possession of any team this weekend. They had 38 minutes on the clock. The Packers only had less than 22 minutes. So the Packers were 40% on third down, and they were the 22nd rated team in early down success rate. So they got to third down a little bit more than average, and only were 40% on third down. So this is definitely going to be a game I'm going to take a little bit closer look at before I formulate my opinions to move on for next week. The Titans at the Bengals. This was the game where the Titans pretty much were out of it from start to finish. The Bengals didn't really impress massively from a statistics standpoint, except for the fact that they were the number 1 team this week in early down success rate offense. They gained 25 first downs, only went to third down 9 times. Now, on third down, they really weren't all that successful, only 33% conversions. But the fact that they avoided so many third downs and marched down the field, they got into the Tennessee Titans red zone 5 times and converted 4 of those 5 into touchdowns. That's an 80% conversion rate. The team is very good inside the red zone offensively, and that was obviously the difference in this game. The other factor, in addition to the fact that they were very efficient offensively and converted in the red zone, they were very strong defensively. To start off, they held the Tennessee Titans to 17% on third downs. They only made 2 of 12 attempts. That was 31st in the NFL. They also held Jake Locker to a 50% completion. That was 31st in the NFL. And 5.2 yards per attempt. That was 27th in the NFL. Overall, Jake Locker delivered a 41 passer rating because he had 2 interceptions to go with that. So that was dead last in the NFL. Now, the one thing the Titans were able to do was actually run the ball. They ran 28 times, gained 149 yards. That was 5.3 yards per attempt. That was the 3rd best in the NFL. But the fact of the matter was the Cincinnati Bengals stopped this team so often on third down, forced them to go to third down frequently, and they themselves avoided third down, marched into the red zone, and converted. So this game was not close. It was a 19-point lead at halftime, a 26-point lead at the end of the third quarter, and obviously they won by 26 points. Moving along to another divisional matchup that was a very strong matchup this weekend was the Arizona Cardinals versus the San Francisco 49ers. As you know, I was on the Cardinals in this one, and they were very strong on third down, converted 62% of their third downs. They got to the window without really strong play from the quarterback position. But what I do like about Bruce Arians, obviously I've mentioned this many times before, I like Bruce Arians as a coordinator, very strong candidate in my book. I think this guy has been lights out wherever he's gone. I really don't think they should have gotten rid of him in Pittsburgh, but certainly he had a lot of success in Indianapolis when he took over there, and obviously is having success out in Arizona, making a lot with very little to work with there, especially when you look at the quarterback position. That's what takes me to my next point. What he was able to do, the backup quarterback there, the fact that he is calling similar routes and aggressiveness with Drew Stanton, his backup quarterback, getting him to push the ball down the field. The fact is, this guy is not as accurate as Carson Palmer. He was only 56%. He was 19 of 34 passing. So that was 30th in the league. So not very accurate, but he made 19 completions and gained 254 yards. So he was pushing the ball down the field on those completions. Flip the script to Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick was very accurate, 78% accuracy. That was 2nd best in the league. But he only threw 29 passes, so that's 10 more than what Drew Stanton threw. And he gained 236 yards, so 20 less yards than Stanton on 10 more completions. So that's obviously tells you that Kaepernick was looking shorter, Stanton more aggressive, bigger plays down the field, and ultimately that's what won the game. But, focusing on the 49ers here briefly, because this is a team in slight turmoil. I bet against them the last 2 weeks, 2-0, taking the Bears and now the Cardinals against them. This is a team that really, their defense is problematic. Obviously, they forced the Cardinals with a backup quarterback. I know it was in Arizona, but the Cardinals punted just 1 time. And in addition, the Cardinals got down to the 49ers red zone 4 times, but only converted 1 into a touchdown. And they still won by a 23-14 final score. So that score could have been even higher if they were a little bit more diligent in the red zone at converting those into touchdowns. And then you look at the third down conversion rate, 62%. So this is a team in the 49ers that their defense needs to improve, and it's up to Kaepernick right now with that defense being weak. He's got to play better. Now, he had 102 passer rating, which was solid. He had a high completion percentage, but he was not pushing the ball far enough down the field. And overall, the 49ers could not get the Arizona Cardinals off the field on third down. Moving to another game that went to the window for us, was the New York Giants took them at home against the Texans. I've been saying for a couple of weeks now that the Texans, based on this particular podcast, I mean, if you're getting things out of this podcast, I've told you for a while now, the Texans were the worst team in early down success rate, offense and defense, yet they got 2 wins to start the season over the Redskins and then again over the Oakland Raiders, and this was a prime position to take the Giants. What did the Giants do? Even though Eli Manning was erratic all season, he was erratic last season, he came in and played extremely well. When you look at his stats alone, let's start there. 122 passer rating, 6th best in the NFL. 75% completion rate, 8th best. And 8.1 yards per attempt, that was 9th best. So Eli Manning played extremely well. When you look at what the team got in run support, they were also able to run the ball on the Houston Texans. They ran the ball for 4.6 yards per attempt, almost 200 rushing yards. They ran it and ran it and ran it 42 times because they did have the lead. They were up by 14 points at the half, so they were able to take advantage of getting their ground game on the field, 4.6 yards per carry. That was 8th best in the NFL. It was remarkable how this game could have been even more of a blowout. They got into the red zone 7 times. They got into the Texans' red zone 7 times. They only converted 2 of those into a touchdown. That was a 29% conversion rate, very poor. So this game could have been even worse for the Houston Texans. Then you look at the fact that the Giants had the 4th most first downs. They had 26 in the NFL. They had the 4th best early down success rate offensively. So this is a team that did very good on early down success rate, did very good at getting into the red zone, did very good at controlling time of possession and moving the ball up and down the field. The other thing I mentioned about the Texans in the past was that, I said this in my write-up, that they're kind of a team that was living on the edge. Because they were so bad in early down success rate, they were getting to third down often, and they were relying on being so good on third down. And what did we see in this game? They only converted 17% of their third down attempts into first downs. They went 2 of 12. So that was 31st in the league, tied with the Tennessee Titans, ironically, who I mentioned a couple games back. So they could not stay on the field long enough to do anything with that offense. And then, of course, they had 3 turnovers. They got 1 takeaway from the Giants, but it was a solid performance from start to finish for the New York Giants. Now the Sunday night game, the Panthers and Steelers. We were on the Steelers in this one, and this game turned into something I obviously was not expecting. The Steelers on the road to win by such a margin. They won by 18 points, 37-19. The second half really did not end up being as close as that. I mean, it seemed like they won by 20-plus points in the second half. The first half was pretty close and competitive. But the Carolina Panthers, with the Steelers' defensive issues and the players that were going out for the Steelers defensively, the Panthers got down to the Steelers' red zone 0 times in this game, none. So that obviously was a problem for the Carolina Panthers. They had 2 fumbles that they lost, and the Steelers gave away no turnovers, so that was obviously positive. The Steelers sacked Cam Newton 3 times. Ben was sacked once. When you look at early down success rate, Steelers were 3rd best in the NFL this week. Panthers were 16th. Neither team was very good on third down. Neither team was. Steelers, 27% conversions. Panthers, 33% conversions. That was 28th and 24th, respectively, in the NFL this past weekend. And then you look at what the Steelers were able to do on the ground, really remarkable how strong of a run game they had, breaking off multiple big runs, totaling 264 yards rushing on 34 carries. That was 7.8 yards per attempt. That was obviously the best in the NFL this weekend. They ran for a ton of yardage on that defense. Really surprising how the Steelers' run game was able to take advantage of that stalwart Panthers defense in this one. Both teams did pretty well overall from a yards per play perspective. Steelers were 3rd best. Panthers were 8th best in the league, but it really was a run game that was clicking. Both quarterbacks played well, so that was not the issue. The issue mainly was Panthers could not get down into the red zone, and the Steelers breaking up big plays to get down into the Panthers' red zone. Ultimately, converted 3 out of 4 times down there and just took this lead on the road and won this game outright. Chargers at the Bills. This was the game a lot of people were looking to fade the Chargers after that big home win against the Seattle Seahawks. Now going on the road at 1 o'clock Eastern to play the Bills. I teased the Chargers, and this was a game that was basically won by Phillip Rivers. When you look at this run game for the Chargers, they ran the ball 37 times for a total of 85 yards. That was 2.3 yards per carry. That's 30th in the league. So they had the lead. They were running the ball, really getting nothing out of it. It came down to Phillip Rivers. He threw 18 completions for 251 yards. Now, that was 10 yards per attempt because he had 72% completion rate. His 10 yards per attempt was 3rd best in the NFL. His passer rating of 131 was 4th best in the NFL. He did not throw a single interception and had 2 passing touchdowns. So this team really had no run support whatsoever, given the fact that Ryan Matthews is out. Danny Woodhead gets hurt in this game. So they really had to go and just rely on Phillip Rivers and that offense to try to stay on the field, move the ball up and down the field. They were somewhat successful. I mean, there was a lot of punts in this game, 11 total punts. The Chargers only had 20 first down. The Bills had 18. But neither team was particularly great on early down success rate offense. Neither team was particularly great on third down conversion rate. So there really isn't a whole lot there other than the fact that, the difference in the quarterback play. The Bills got better production out of the run game, 4 yards per carry. That was 15th in the league, but neither team was really running tremendously. It really came down to the quarterbacks. So that's who it was a battle of, the quarterbacks. There was no turnovers in this game. So E.J. Manuel versus Phillip Rivers. E.J. Manuel, 28th in completion percentage, 29th in yards per pass, 22nd in passer rating. So when you look at, he threw for 5.1 yards per attempt. Philip Rivers threw for double that, 10 yards per attempt. So that's really what this game was won or lost by, the lack of quarterback production from the Bills and the fact that the Chargers were able to get some. When you go down south to South Florida and you look at the Chiefs visiting the Dolphins, Chiefs were a team needing to get a win, get off that winless record, and they surely came down there and proved a point. It started with Alex Smith playing very efficiently. He had a 133 passer rating, third best in the NFL, 76% completions. As typical Alex Smith, he's not going to throw deep very often, so he's only 6.7 yards per attempt, but he was efficient with what he did throw. He did not throw any interceptions, and he ended up throwing 3 passing touchdowns. When you look at the comparison on his counterpart, Ryan Tannehill, the league's worst completion rate of 49%, the second worst yards per attempt of 4.4 yards per attempt. That's what a lot of teams get when they're having a really good week running, and that's what the Dolphins got out of Tannehill passing the ball. He had a 69 passer rating, which was 27th in the league, and he didn't even throw any interceptions, so surely that would have been even worse had he thrown some interceptions. The Dolphins had to rely on their ground game, 7.1 yards per rush. That was second best in the league. So right there, they averaged almost 3 more yards when they ran the ball than when they asked Ryan Tannehill to drop back and pass it. That's pretty pathetic from an NFL caliber offense. So they've got a lot to work on offensively for the Dolphins, particularly because this Chiefs defense really was not, they let Peyton Manning work the ball up and down the field on them. The Chiefs controlled that game and kept it close by keeping their offense on the field and converting on third down against the Broncos. So don't get it confused. I said this last week. It's not the Chiefs defense that was playing good against the Broncos that kept that game within a cover. It was the Chiefs offense staying out on the field. In this game, it was actually Ryan Tannehill playing terribly. And there was a total of 9 sacks in this game. So it was a pretty sloppy game from that rate. From that perspective, there was 12 punts, 9 sacks, as I mentioned. But and then third down conversions is the last one I'll throw out for this game. Chiefs went 56% on third down attempts, and the Dolphins were down at 27%. So basically double the productivity there on third down, and that accounted for everything they needed to produce a 19-point road victory as an underdog. And that was the second largest ATS cover of the week. The first, obviously, was the Falcons blowing out the Buccaneers. Let's move down to the third largest. Actually, this is the fourth largest by a half a point. We talked about the Steelers and Panthers earlier. The Jaguars versus the Colts. The Colts, there's not a whole lot to say here. I mean, the Jaguars, I've mentioned this last week, there's just not a lot to talk about this team. I'm glad that they got Blake Bortles into the mix because Henry really is not going to show this team very much. So their defense allowed, the Colts on the road. The Colts have a good offense, but they don't have an offense at 9 yards per pass attempt, 385 passing yards, 77% completion percentage. I love Andrew Luck, but I don't doubt 77% completion percentage. But if he's throwing for 9 yards per attempt on your defense, this is a team that tries to run the ball as well in the Colts, then you've got defensive problems, and that's exactly what the Jaguars have. The Colts were also able to run for 5 yards per attempt. That was the 5th best in the NFL. Second best yards per play rate at 7.2 yards per play. So it was just total domination, basically from start to finish. They jumped out to a 10-point lead at the first quarter, and at halftime it was a 30-point lead. So they led by 34 at the peak, and it just wasn't even close. With that said, let's move on to a game where I was actually on the under in this one, and that was the Raiders at the Patriots. This is the first week for my computer model, and it actually did extremely well predicting totals. Got the Cincinnati under, got the Washington Redskins over, got that Atlanta Falcons over on Thursday night, and got this under here in this Patriots-Raiders game. This is a game where the Raiders, it was an interesting game because the Patriots, I've said this before, you just saw it flash up there in the statistics section earlier, they are not playing well early down success rate offense. They are getting themselves far too many third downs. Now, they did complete 50% of their third downs. That was 9th best in the NFL. But 27th in early down success rate offense, 30th in early down success rate offense for the Raiders. So that's why we saw a lot of punts, a lot of slow drives. The clock just kept ticking. Ended up having a final score of 16-9. Obviously, the Raiders covering this easily. But you look at the yards per play, Patriots, 4.18 yards per play. That was worse than the Raiders of 4.3, and the Patriots were 30th in the NFL in yards per play. They could not run the ball at all. They tried 32 times, gained only 76 yards. That was 2.4 yards per carry, 29th in the NFL. The Raiders, they had a rookie quarterback in there, did not play very well. When you look at what he was doing offensively, he threw 1 interception. He passed for 5.1 yards per attempt. That was 30th in the NFL. A 63 passer rating. That was 29th in the NFL. But Tom Brady didn't light the world on fire either. 65% completions for 6 yards per attempt. 6 yards per attempt is 25th in the NFL. His 90 passer rating was 18th in the NFL. These teams got down into the red zone combined 6 times, and only the Patriots were able to convert one of those into a touchdown. So very poor performance inside of the red zone for both teams, but it resulted in a low-scoring ball game that the Patriots won, but the Raiders covered. Let's close out the last 4 games on this card. This is going to be the longest podcast, obviously, until later in the season when all the other teams are off byes. But for the future. We will be able to get through this section a lot quicker, but these are still some great matchups to talk about. The Rams versus the Cowboys, obviously a back-and-forth game. The Cowboys had a 10-point lead late in the game. The Rams had a 21-point lead earlier in the game. Ended up being a 3-point victory in the come-from-behind manner for the Dallas Cowboys. The story here, in my opinion, was the fact that the Cowboys had been leaning so much on their running game. And it's not that their running game let them down. They still ran for 4.2 yards per carry, which was 11th best in the NFL. It wasn't 5 yards per carry or 6, but it was still a very respectable number. But Tony Romo played much better. This offense needed him to play better this week, put a little bit more on his shoulders. He definitely delivered. But here's the interesting factor. Although the Rams jumped out to that lead, they were up by 7 points after the first quarter and by 11 points at halftime. The Cowboys kept running the ball, which is very interesting because Jason Garrett, definitely known for a guy who goes back to the pass early and often when they're trailing. Anytime, any situation that it comes up, he's passing the ball. Well, in this case, they still had 29 run plays, only 23 pass plays for Tony Romo. So what do I mean by when he stepped up? Well, he took those 23 passes. He converted 18 of them. That's third best completion percentage at 78 for 9.4 yards per attempt, fourth best, and the 117 passer rating, that was eighth best in the NFL. So very efficient from Tony Romo. Not a ton of volume. They're still trying to work him back, but clearly he had that wide open ball to Des Bryant. He was able to hit that one. So perhaps his back is starting to come around. I still think their goal, obviously, is to try to keep everything very balanced offensively, and that's certainly been working for them, particularly the last couple of weeks. When you look at the rest of this game, pretty much very bad performance by both of the defenses. If you look at the yards per play, both teams were 10th or better in yards per play in this game. When you look at the third down conversion rate, both teams were 9th or better. And when you look at the early down success rate offense, both teams were 10th or better. So the defenses really didn't come to play. There's only 3 total punts this entire game, both teams combined. So that's something to notice, trending forward perhaps, is the ability for both these offenses to have to step up to overcome their defenses. And we'll see what type of offenses these teams play in the near future. Obviously, we know what's happening Sunday night when the Saints go into Dallas. Let's jump ahead to that Saints game against the Vikings. This is a game where the theme for the Saints so far this season has been great offense, bad defense. And at least one of those held true this game, great offense. If you look at what the Saints were able to do, 27 first downs, 5th best early down success rate, 2nd best third down conversion rate, 4th best completion percentage at 77%. They were 8.2 yards per attempt and 120 passer rating. So all of those were very good. Drew Brees played well, moved his ball efficiently down the field. 3.4 yards per carry. That was not very good from this offense, 21st in the NFL. So then you look at, okay, well, did that defense play better? Well, it's hard to really say if it was the defense or if it was the Vikings offense, because the Vikings offense, obviously they struggled last week against the Patriots. Now they come into the Saints Stadium. They certainly struggled here, and how much of it was them struggling, them losing Matt Castle, needing to put Teddy Bridgewater in there. Not that I don't like Teddy Bridgewater. I'm very high on his ceiling in terms of what I think he could do in this league, but to not get all the first-team reps in practice that he brought in midway through the third game of your rookie season, playing in the Dome against the Saints in their first home opener of the year, that is a very difficult situation to be put in. What I didn't like about the Vikings, obviously, when I have a plus 10.5 in my pocket and they lose by 11 and they were only down by 4 at the end of the third quarter, this was one of the few defeats that I had on the card this week. I had a good week in the NFL, obviously 9-3. But when you look at what the Vikings did, they got to the Saints red zone twice, so not a high number, but they came away with no scores, no touchdowns. It was just field goal attempts. They went 3 for 3 on field goal attempts, but they really didn't do anything other than that. So clearly the Saints dominated this performance, but they did not dominate it on the scoreboard itself. When you think if this could be a game where what if the Vikings took one of those drives and actually scored a touchdown when they were only down by 4 points heading into the fourth quarter, they would be up by 3 points heading into later in the game in the Saints home opener as a 10.5-point underdog. So the Saints should have pulled away further, but they still went 2 for 3 in the red zone. It was just overall a good performance by that offense, but they spent a lot of time running the ball very unsuccessfully against this Vikings defense that really were able to stop the run and only sacked Brees once, but were able to do just enough to prevent this Saints offense from really exploding in terms of points on the scoreboard. Moving ahead to the most marquee of all the matchups this week was the Broncos visiting the Seahawks. And this game here, I'll just cut right to it, started out with Monty Ball fumbling on the first play from scrimmage for the Broncos, and it looked downhill from there, and it certainly was definitely downhill for that running game. That running game, they tried to run it 20 times. They only gained 36 yards. That's 1.8 yards per attempt. So that was basically nothing from the running game whatsoever in this contest. Probably the worst performance from a running game this entire season. To run it 20 times and gain 36 yards is absolutely pathetic. So it came down to Peyton Manning. Now, Manning did not have a very good game overall. If you saw the game, you probably got a little bit, but here the statistics, 63% completions, that was 18th in the NFL, 6 yards per attempt, that was 24th in the NFL. Now, obviously, he almost threw for 300 yards, so that was higher number of passing yards, but it took him 49 attempts to get there, and he only completed 31 of those. And so he had an 85 passer rating, which is 20th in the NFL. Russell Wilson had a 99 passer rating, and Manning did throw that interception late in the game, which seemingly would have almost felt like was locking the door for the Broncos to get back in it before they had a miraculous drive and then converted on a 2-point conversion attempt. So it's really not anything to write home about from either offense. You know, the Seahawks didn't run wild over them. They only ran for 3.5 yards per carry. That was 18th in the NFL. Russell Wilson had a good day, 99 passer rating, but not a great day. But, I mean, he came through at clutch time when they needed him to in overtime. But very, very entertaining game, obviously, when you consider the comeback and what the Broncos were able to do late in the game, and certainly that final drive in overtime by Russell Wilson. Lastly, last game on the board, it was the Jets and the Bears on Monday night. This was a game where I was anticipating heading into this game that Jay Cutler was not going to see the time in the pocket that he did see the prior week against the weakened pass rush of the 49ers. So he was not going to have the success that he had in throwing for all the yards per attempt and all those passing yards, touchdowns like he did in driving their comeback last week. And I thought that they would not be able to run the ball. So when you factor those two things in, I thought it was going to be up to Geno Smith working against this depleted secondary without Charles Tillman, banged up all across the board. And I felt like he was going to be able to get this victory. And ultimately, he did not. You know, that was certainly disappointing. If you're watching this game, it's very frustrating watching that young guy struggle in there. But so you look at his statistics: 60% completion, 7 yards per attempt, 70 passer rating because he did throw 2 interceptions. That was 26th in the NFL. Compare him, however, to Jay Cutler. So if some of this prediction was at all accurate, Jay Cutler only threw for 5.2 yards per attempt. That was 28th in the NFL. When you're watching the game, you might not have seen that. You might have just seen all these pass plays he was completing and all these DBs looking so terrible for the Jets. But he only threw for 5.2 yards per attempt. When you look at the run game, again, like I was suspecting, the Jets were able to stuff that run soundly, especially in the first half. They were getting, I think, 1 yard per carry for most of the first half. Ended up for the game 2.9 yards per carry, 21 rushes for only 60 yards. That was 27th in the NFL. So on a yards per play basis, the Bears only had 4 yards per play. That was 31st in the NFL, the second worst yards per play. So how did they win this game by the score? Well, it came down to basically 2 things. They won it by basically, it was a 1-score game at the end, a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, would have tied this thing up. So and the Jets certainly were driving in the red zone for the 6th time of the day to try to tie it up. So this was basically a 1-score game. When you look at the flipping of scores here, we had 2 defensive scores in this game. The second play of the game, Geno Smith throws a pick 6 on his first passing attempt. So the Bears have a touchdown. The Jets get a fumble from Jay Cutler and run that in for a touchdown, but the referees blew the whistle before the guy crossed the goal line, said that they thought the quarterback knee was down, where clearly replay showed that it wasn't down, and the Jets touchdown should have counted. However, it did not. They just gave the Jets the ball back, which obviously is infuriating, this inconsistency in the refereeing. It goes across multiple games, not just this one, but you know, when in doubt, let the play stand, and you can always review it later. I don't understand what the league office is telling these referees to do here, but they're making, you know, judgment calls from 20, 30 feet away from plays at times. You're trying to get it right and blowing the whistle when you could just go to replay and have zoomed in camera angles, multiple angles to look at something in super slow motion to figure out what the right call should be instead of blowing something dead that, you know, was an ongoing play with a player returning the ball for a touchdown. So right there, that was a 14-point swing in the game. It turned out to be a 7-point swing, but there were 2 touchdowns. 1 counted, 1 did not. And then the second factor was the Jets got into the red zone 6 times, as I mentioned earlier, and converted just 1 into a touchdown. Now, 6 times into the red zone, that was the most under Rex Ryan for the Jets, and converting just once, that was obviously a horrible red zone conversion rate. If you look at teams that did get into the red zone 6 or more times and converted 1 or less times, ironically, these teams actually fared pretty well. It's only happened 36 times the last 15 years, but those teams actually won 77% of those 35 games because by getting into the red zone 6 times, you're at least guaranteeing yourself in general a bunch of field goals, which is 3 points each. You're taking time off the board. You've got the ball, so your opponent does not. So in general, these teams still do very well. Obviously, if the Jets got 1 more touchdown there, this game would have been a different ball game. So you look at the Bears, you look at what they did offensively, not very much. 17th first downs, which is 28th in the NFL. 29th in early down success rate. So both of those, the Jets were better than them in both of those accounts. Jets had 2 more turnovers than did the Bears. Jets had 3, Bears had 1. And as I mentioned, in terms of yards per rush, the Jets had 4.4, the Bears had 2.9, the Jets had a better yards per play. So this really was a game. If you talk to Rex Ryan after that game versus the Raiders, where the Raiders were able to get a late cover week 1 at the Jets, and you look at the box score as we did, and we said this game really should not have been as close as it was. The Jets really should have beaten this team soundly, and they left a lot out on the field. It's for the Jets to not get the cover in that one, and the Raiders to get that backdoor cover. Basically, same exact situation here. When you look at this box score, when you look at behind the details of some of these numbers, the Jets played a better ball game overall from top to bottom than the Bears. They just had problems in the areas that matter the most. 2 extra turnovers. One of them was a pick 6. You don't count a turnover for a touchdown for the Jets, so they get that bad luck. And then they go 1 of 6 in the red zone, so they're down there 6 times. They just can't score. So keep this in mind when you're looking at the Jets moving forward. The hard part is this going to be a trend because E.J. Manuel is this bad, especially in the red zone, and he's going to be throwing these interceptions. So is this going to be a trend that you're going to consider moving forward, or is it going to be something that you think could level back off, and eventually the Jets are going to take advantage of all these opportunities that they're given and actually win some of these games? And then on the flip side, look at the Bears. The Bears got really lucky in this game, in my opinion, considering the statistics they put up on the board to walk away with a victory. They lost a lot of defensive players in this game, again, like they did last week. So, consider this. A lot of people are going to be, whoever bet the Bears, which a lot of the public was on the Bears, taking them as an underdog, walking away with an 8-point win. They're thinking, wow, the Bears crushed these Jets. This is a really awesome team. And the reality is, not so fast. This team is good, but they have a lot of deficiencies and need to improve substantially. Against certain teams and matchups, I'm sure they'll have better edges. You just have to look at who they're playing, what that opponent's strengths are. It's going to really help you moving forward. Injuries are a vital part of this game. As we know, we need to factor those into our handicapping. So let's take an early look. I mentioned injuries were substantial. There's a number of key players that were lost for the season this past week. So let's run through these teams. First of all, Arizona Cardinals this past week. Heading into this game, they lost Jonathan Dwyer and John Abraham. They're out for the season. In terms of during this game, we don't know the status of Carson Palmer yet. He's still dealing with that nerve issue in his shoulder. So they're having issues with him, and so they're looking to start their backup until Palmer is healthy and capable of playing. When you talk about the Atlanta Falcons, they survived, it seems like, pretty successfully from an injury perspective. The Baltimore Ravens have lost a big player. Dennis Pitt, a tight end, certainly very useful in the Gary Kubiak-style offense, very helpful for Joe Flacco when they won the Super Bowl, very reliant upon Dennis Pitt's abilities out on the field, was out on the field an awful lot for that team, so that's going to be a very big loss. For the Buffalo Bills, they lost Marcus Beasley, a wide receiver, and Jonathan Meeks is out for the season. Earlier with a neck injury, he was out last week. Marcus Beasley is out with a knee injury. He'll be out for 4 to 6 weeks. Carolina Panthers, their big injury against the Steelers is Mike Tolbert. He's on the IR designated return list with a leg injury. I believe it's his knee. So that's obviously a problem for them because Jonathan Stewart went down with a knee injury as well. And D'Angelo Williams, I don't think, played in the game to begin with. So I'm not sure what his status is in terms of returning, but they're down some running backs there. Obviously, this team loves to run the ball. When you talk about the Chicago Bears, we already knew that Charles Tillman was out for the season. They had Ryan Mundy go down with a neck injury. We're not sure what his status is. Chris Conte went down with a shoulder injury on Monday night. We're not sure what his status is. So they are suffering in their secondary. Cincinnati Bengals are on a bye week, and so they're going to have a little bit of time to rest up, probably get Vontaze Burfict back. He's out with a concussion, and some of these guys get a little bit healthier, such as A.J. Green and Marvin Jones are wide receivers. When you look down to the Detroit Lions, they lost Stephen Tulloch. He was out for the season with an ACL injury, I believe. He suffered that while he was celebrating after a play, so that is unfortunate for the Lions at linebacker. And they have a number of DBs that obviously they knew they lost Nevin Lawson prior to this week, but after I recorded my last podcast, they knew that he was going to be out for the season. He's on the IR list. They got a couple other DBs that are injured. You look at the Green Bay Packers, Clay Matthews, he suffered some type of a groin injury. His status is uncertain right now. The Indianapolis Colts, let's jump down to them. It looks like they are pretty healthy as well. The Jacksonville Jaguars lost DB Chris Pernosky. He's out with an elbow injury. He's been placed on the IR list. But they also lost Mercedes Lewis, who was lost prior to this game, the ankle injury. He's I think he might be on that IR to return list until week 11. And then you jump down to the Miami Dolphins. They're dealing with injuries to their linebacker, Koomisi. He's problematic. So we'll have to see how healthy he actually is going to be. You look at the Vikings, they had a number of guys who were banged up and beat up in terms of injuries. They lost a guard, Brandon Fusco. He's got a shoulder injury. Matt Castle, he messed up his foot. Obviously, broke a bunch of bones in his foot. He's out indefinitely. They also lost tight end Kyle Rudolph to a groin injury. He's out indefinitely. So you take away the quarterback and the tight end, which who does North Kerner like to go to in his offense? He likes to go to, the fundamental reason I like the Vikings heading into the season, a strong running game with a very good mobile tight end. You think about what he used to have there with Novacek and Emmitt Smith down in Dallas for a while. Now you don't have Kyle Rudolph, you don't have Adrian Peterson, so it's going to be really difficult for North Carolina to see a lot of success there like he was planning on seeing. The Saints, Mark Ingram, he was out with a hand injury. He's out for a few weeks. We'll see when he's going to return. But center Jonathan Goodwin banged up his ankle. We're not sure exactly when he's going to or what his injury status is going to be. The Giants, they already had to put Drell Jernigan on IR, one of their wide receivers. And Odell Beckham, he's not playing this week against the Redskins on Thursday night. They're looking at maybe a Week 5 return for him. When you look at the Jets, Eric Decker went out with a hamstring injury from this last game. He came into the game with a hamstring injury. So I'll have to see what his status is. Dean Milner, obviously, they're dealing with him. He's a DB for them. He's listed as day-to-day right now. Raiders headed over to London. C.O. Moore is out with an ankle injury. Well, we'll have to see if he's playing. He's listed as week-to-week. And Rod Streeter, he's out indefinitely. He messed up his foot in this last game. Same with Tyvon Branch and DB for that team. When you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, they lost their center, Jason Kelsey, out 6 to 8 weeks. So they already were dealing with a bunch of replacements on that offensive line. Their offensive coordinator has assured us that they will be starting 5 players along the offensive line this week. He has no idea who they are, but that's the promise that he's given. Michael Kendricks, the linebacker, he missed last week's game. We'll have to see if he's able to play in this week's game, but that was definitely a big loss for them. He's one of their best linebackers, one of the better defensive players. The Steelers lost a number of guys on defense that forced them to go sign James Harrison. former player. Obviously, he was on the Cincinnati Bengals when they were in Hard Knocks last year. You look at Darvish Jones. He is, I don't know if he's on the designated to return list, IR designated return or what, but he's out with a wrist injury. They're thinking maybe a Week 12 return for him. Ryan Shazier, their star linebacker, another linebacker. He's a rookie. His status is uncertain. He's out for a few weeks with a knee injury. Ike Taylor out indefinitely, broke his arm. Pretty nasty break for him. And Dree Archer still dealing with an ankle injury. I don't think they're sure when he's going to play. Jump down to the San Diego Chargers, a big loss for them. Danny Woodhead certainly was a very good flex player for that offense, could do a lot of things, kind of like a utility role for them. Not many guys in the league like Danny Woodhead, so they're going to be missing him because they knew how to use him really well. A lot of teams probably would not know how to use a guy like him, but the Chargers were using him very effectively, so that's going to be a loss for them. Let's see here. The Seattle Seahawks, they're in good shape. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Doug Martin, I think he's going to be back. Gerald McCoy, I think he's going to be back. Vincent Jackson with a wrist injury, I think he's going to be back as well. Still not sure what's going on with Josh McCown with his thumb injury. Jumping down to the Washington Redskins, they had a number of injuries in this last game as well. They lost 2 defensive backs out for the season. D'Angelo Hall towards Achilles, he is out for a season. And they also had an issue with heel injury to one of their other DBs, and he is out for the season as well, put on the IR list. So, and they've already announced that Jordan Reed is not going to play on Thursday night. So that's a rundown of the injuries. Obviously, we'll get more details on those as the week progresses from some of these coaches and they start having press conferences on Wednesday, but that's an early look at them. So that wraps it up for the Week 4 edition of the Rearview Mirror podcast. Looking ahead to this week, a lot of good matchups across the board, I think. A couple of really good divisional matchups. We got one Thursday, the Giants and the Redskins, and we've got one on Sunday with Green Bay traveling to Chicago. But overall, this is a week where there's a lot of non-divisional games on the card. But that provides a few interesting matchups for teams such as the Steve Smith reunion when Carolina visits Baltimore. I think this Detroit Lions-New York Jets game is going to be fascinating as well to try to see how the Jets rebound after that performance on Monday night. Obviously interested to see what Tampa Bay is going to come out the gates with against Pittsburgh because that team looked horrible last Thursday night. And you've got this pivotal matchup, very defining, I would almost say season-defining matchup for the San Francisco 49ers hosting the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles have been coming from behind, winning their games. San Francisco could drop to 1-3 if they lose this game, and the Eagles would be undefeated on the season. And that would be a big problem for San Francisco in their division where they've got the Arizona Cardinals, who are currently undefeated, and they've also got the Seattle Seahawks, who are playing very good football right now, too. So that's going to be big. We've got to see what Minnesota brings to the table when they host the Atlanta Falcons, that red-hot offense. Will the Minnesota Vikings be able to cool them off? Will the Minnesota Vikings be able to move the ball offensively themselves to do some things? Sunday night game, very interesting game. You would not have thought this heading into the season, but the 2-1 Dallas Cowboys are hosting the 1-2 New Orleans Saints, so that's another very intriguing matchup. Monday night, not so much. Should be a good game to see what Tom Brady brings down to when they play Andy Reid's Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City.
This is going to be a fun ride. This is going to be a fun ride.
Everybody want clap.
I'm going to play when I want to play. Do what I want to do. I'm going to say what I want to say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. To take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody want clap. One clap. One clap. One clap.